You are standing on a rock in the middle of the ocean. No trees, no water you can drink, no people. Just you, the wind, and a flag someone stuck in the ground decades ago. And somewhere over the horizon, a warship is already turning toward you. Why would anyone send a warship for this? This rock is smaller than a football field. It has no oil rig, no airstrip, no harbor. By every normal measure, it is worthless. And yet nations have spent decades, sometimes centuries, refusing to let it go. Here is the secret you are about to learn. In geopolitics, size lies. A single square meter of the right rock can be worth more than an entire city. Not because of what sits on top of it, because of what surrounds it. Let's go back 300 years to understand how this game began. In 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht ended a war nobody in Spain wanted to lose. Buried inside that treaty was a single clause. Spain ceded a narrow limestone peninsula called Gibraltar to Britain. At the time, it looked like a footnote, a tiny strip of rock, barely 2.5 square miles. But look at a map. Gibraltar sits at the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, the exact point where the Atlantic Ocean squeezes through a gap only 8 miles wide. Whoever holds that gap can watch, and if needed stop, every ship moving between Europe, Africa, and the entire Middle East. You are not defending a rock. You are defending a doorway. Picture yourself on that limestone cliff in the 18th century, watching sails pass below. Merchant ships from Genoa, naval convoys from France. Every single one of them has to pass close enough for you to count their masts. That is what a choke point feels like from the inside. You do nothing, and the world still has to ask your permission to move. This is the first rule of tiny territory. Geography does not care about size, it cares about position. A speck of land at the right choke point is worth more than 1,000 miles of empty desert. Now picture yourself again, centuries later, standing on a different kind of tiny land. Not a peninsula this time, a reef, barely visible at high tide, submerged more than it is dry. In the South China Sea, features like Fiery Cross Reef were once nothing more than coral scraping the surface of the water. Fishermen from several countries had passed over them for generations without much argument. Then, starting around 2014, dredging ships arrived. Sand was pumped up from the seafloor for months at a time. Slowly, a reef became an island. An island grew an airstrip long enough to land military aircraft. An airstrip grew a garrison, radar towers, and a harbor. Why go through all that effort and that expense for a rock that used to disappear underwater twice a day? Here's the twist that changes everything you thought you knew about borders. In 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS, set a rule that quietly reshaped the planet. Any nation that legally holds even the smallest qualifying island gets something enormous in return. A 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone radiating out from that island in every direction. Do the math with me for a second. 200 nautical miles is not a borderline. It is a circle of ocean roughly the size of a small country. Fishing rights inside it, oil and gas rights beneath it, shipping lanes running straight through the middle of it, all requiring at least a nod toward whoever holds the coastline nearest to them. So imagine you are a government official studying a satellite photo of a reef nobody has ever lived on. You are not seeing rock. You are seeing the outline of a private ocean, waiting to be claimed the moment that rock legally counts as land. But there is a catch, and it is the kind of catch that turns geologists into lawyers. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled on this exact question for the Spratly Islands, in a case brought by the Philippines against China. The court concluded that many of these disputed features were legally rocks, not islands, under UNCLOS's own wording, which stripped away the 200-mile rights some nations had claimed around them. The ruling did not stop the dredging on the ground. It simply proved, in the clearest way possible, how much was riding on a single legal definition. A rock the size of your living room, if it qualifies under the right wording, can unlock a private ocean larger than most nations. That is not an exaggeration. That is maritime law, written by committee in the 1970s, still deciding sovereignty disputes today. So when a country pours concrete onto a submerged reef, it is not building an island. It is buying insurance on an ocean. Let's bring this closer to something almost gentle, so you can see the other side of this story. Not every tiny territory dispute is about oil or shipping lanes. Some of it is simply about not backing down. For over 4 decades, Canada and Denmark quietly disputed ownership of Hans Island, a barren piece of limestone between Greenland and Ellesmere Island, home to exactly nobody, not even a permanent research station. I know it looks enormous in the illustration, but that's just for your eyeballs. In real life, it's just a rock covering about half a square mile. Soldiers and Coast Guard crews from both countries would occasionally visit by helicopter or icebreaker, take down the other side's flag, plant their own, and leave behind a bottle of Canadian whiskey or Danish schnapps for whoever arrived next. Journalists nicknamed it the Whisky War. Nobody was ever hurt. Nobody ever really expected to be. Then, in 2022, Foreign Ministers Melanie Joly of Canada and Jeppe Kofod of Denmark did something almost unthinkable in territorial disputes. Instead of escalating, they split the island with a straight boundary line down the middle, creating Canada's very first land border with a European nation, and shook hands over it. Why does that story feel so different from Gibraltar or the Spratly Islands? Because it reveals the second rule hiding underneath every tiny territory dispute. Sometimes, the land itself means nothing at all. What matters is the sentence a government gets to say afterward. We did not give up our claim. We did not disappear from the map. Even a barren rock becomes a symbol once a flag has stood on it. And symbols, unlike oil, never run out and never need to be renewed. Now step back and hold all 3 of these truths in your hands at once. Gibraltar taught you that position beats size, that a doorway is worth more than the room behind it. The Spratly Islands taught you that legal definitions can turn a submerged reef into an ocean's worth of rights, if you can dredge fast enough and argue convincingly enough. Hans Island taught you that sometimes a nation defends a rock simply because backing down feels more expensive, in pride and in precedent, than the rock itself. 3 completely different reasons, 1 identical outcome. Tiny land, disproportionate value. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. This pattern is not shrinking, it is accelerating. As fishing stocks decline worldwide and undersea resources become harder to locate elsewhere, that 200 nautical mile rule under UNCLOS turns every remaining unclaimed islet into a potential prize. Coastlines are being surveyed right now for features barely larger than a parking lot, because whoever registers the claim first and can defend the legal argument that it qualifies as an island inherits the ocean drawn around it. You already live inside the consequences of this system, even if you have never noticed. That imported seafood on your plate this week likely crossed water controlled, in part, because of a choke point the size of a neighborhood. That shipping container carrying your last online order almost certainly passed within sight of a rock, a reef, or a peninsula that 2 governments once argued over for generations. Think about how strange this actually is, once you say it out loud. Warships have been dispatched, treaties have been signed by kings and foreign ministers, entire naval budgets have been built around features you could walk across in under a minute. Meanwhile, vast stretches of genuinely empty desert, hundreds of miles of it, sit unclaimed and untouched because no ocean, no strait, no fishing zone depends on who owns the sand. That is the final piece of the puzzle. Emptiness alone has never started a dispute. Position does. A tiny rock beside open water will always be worth more than a massive territory that touches nothing important. Ask yourself what this means for the next 50 years. As sea ice melts and new shipping routes open through the Arctic, expect new tiny disputes to surface there, over islands nobody wanted a decade ago. As deep-sea mining technology improves, expect nations to argue even harder over which barren rocks legally qualify for an exclusive economic zone. Because the seabed beneath that zone may soon be worth more than the fish swimming above it. You will not read about most of these disputes on the front page. They rarely involve invasions or headlines. They involve surveyors, lawyers, and quiet diplomatic cables, arguing for years over the exact legal status of a place most people will never visit. So return to where you started. Standing on that rock, wind in your face, warship somewhere past the horizon. It is not empty anymore, is it? That rock was never really about the rock. It was about the doorway it guards, the ocean it silently unlocks, or the sentence a nation refuses to let history write without them in it. And the next time you see a tiny dot of land on a map, disputed by two countries that otherwise have nothing to fight about, you will know exactly what they are really fighting over.